She just wanted to surprise him and went to his relative's house with food. But what she saw in the house made her numb. Subscribe and subscribe in the comments where you're watching from. The morning sun filtered softly through the thin curtains of the small, tidy kitchen. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg hung in the air, drifting from the batch of sweet potato pies cooling on the counter. Lauren moved with quiet purpose, her hands steady as she slid a tray of cornbread into the oven. It was Sunday, the day she reserved for cooking meals for Daniel's uncle. At least, that was how it had always been described. Her husband would make the hour-long drive to the outskirts of Baltimore to drop off the food, check on the man, and come home in the evening. Sometimes with stories about traffic, sometimes with silence, but always with a grateful kiss on her cheek and a quiet, tired smile. Lauren was a woman of habit, of resilience, and of soft-spoken strength. At 38, she had survived a stormy past and emerged with calloused but capable hands. Her previous marriage had left bruises that didn't always show. Financial ruin, emotional manipulation, and the lonely climb out of a pit dug by someone she had once trusted. But Lauren had never learned to stop caring. Her heart had not hardened. It had grown careful. She met Daniel by accident, though looking back, she often thought that something greater had been guiding them. It was at a school fundraiser. She had baked for the event: pecan pies, banana bread, collard green hand pies, all wrapped and labeled with handwritten notes. Daniel, a soft-spoken architect in a dark wool coat, had stopped to buy 2 pies. He ended up sitting near her table and striking up a conversation about cast-iron skillets and the childhood smell of cornbread. There was no flirtation, no performance, just shared warmth over shared food. Now, 3 years later, they shared a home. Not extravagant, but deeply theirs. A 2-bedroom brick house with creaky wood floors and a wraparound porch that Lauren had covered in potted plants and wind chimes. Inside, the walls held framed photos of the 2 of them, smiling at a pumpkin patch, standing together at a lake, holding coffee mugs and matching pajamas one Christmas morning. The kitchen was Lauren's domain, filled with cast-iron pans, a vintage recipe box, and hand-sewn pot holders from her late aunt. Daniel had built her spice rack himself and joked about installing a second fridge just for her pie dough. They didn't have children, not yet, but they had talked about it. Lauren, who had once sworn off the idea, had begun to imagine a future with a child's laughter in their home. Daniel had been gentle with the topic, never pushing. He only said, "When we're ready, and if we're never ready, that's okay too." Their life was steady, not without tension, not without the quiet moments of miscommunication that occur between any 2 people, but it was safe. Real. Lauren trusted Daniel. He was patient in a way that calmed her storms, the kind of man who remembered how she took her tea and noticed when her silence meant something more than fatigue. Still, there were small things, subtle shifts in rhythm, that Lauren couldn't explain away. Daniel had been driving to see his uncle every week since before they were married. At first, it had seemed normal, even admirable. "He doesn't have anyone else," Daniel had said once, wiping his hands after fixing the man's leaking faucet. "And he's proud. Won't take a nurse." But over the past year, something in Daniel had changed. He would return from those visits more withdrawn, not cold, but distant, like a man burdened by a story he couldn't quite share. When Lauren asked how the uncle was doing, Daniel would offer vague answers. "He's hanging in there," or "still stubborn as ever." She never pressed. Maybe she should have. Maybe she had been too trusting, too eager to believe that a good man could have no secrets. Sunday meals had become part of their routine. Lauren would cook, Daniel would pack the car, and they would part with a kiss at the door. He would drive off with a thermos of sweet tea and a tray of food balanced on the back seat. She never went with him. He had always said his uncle didn't like visitors, and Lauren respected that. She believed in boundaries and letting people keep their dignity. This morning was no different, on the surface. Lauren woke early, took a shower, and dressed in her soft cotton robe. The kitchen was warm from the oven. She hummed as she moved between stovetop and counter, flipping buttermilk pancakes for herself and wrapping the meatloaf in foil for the trip. She placed everything into labeled containers: collard greens in one, mac and cheese in another, corn muffins wrapped in a cloth napkin. Daniel came in as she was wiping down the counters. He kissed her forehead and poured himself a cup of coffee. "You outdid yourself again," he said, lifting the lid on the peach cobbler. "He's going to love this." "He always does," Lauren replied, smiling faintly. Daniel leaned against the doorway, sipping his coffee. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed, his jaw stubbled. He hadn't shaved that morning. Lauren studied him for a moment, feeling that quiet ache of familiarity that comes with loving someone for a long time. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Just tired. Long week." Lauren said nothing more. She packed the bags carefully, making sure the soup containers were sealed and the bread wouldn't be crushed. When Daniel took the bags out to the car, she watched him from the window. Something about the way he walked, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes downcast, made her chest tighten, but she pushed the feeling aside. Maybe he was just tired. They were all tired, weren't they? After Daniel left, Lauren spent the rest of the day cleaning the house. She vacuumed the living room, watered the plants, and reorganized the spice rack. She tried to keep her mind occupied, but every so often, she would glance at the clock and wonder where he was, what he was doing. Her thoughts didn't spiral. Not yet. She trusted him. She had to. He had given her no reason not to. But still, a sliver of doubt began to press its way in, like a splinter under the skin. She remembered a moment 2 months prior, when Daniel had come home later than usual. He had said there was traffic, but his hands had been trembling slightly, and his smile had looked rehearsed. She had noticed, but said nothing. She had chosen to believe him, and then she had forced herself to forget. Now, though, with the house quiet around her and the windows closed to the cold, she let herself remember. The half-finished sentences, the way he sometimes looked at his phone and quickly turned it over, the fact that she had never once spoken to this uncle. No video calls, no thank you notes. Just Daniel's word. That should have been enough, but her gut told her something was off. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't scandalous. It was quieter than that. Like a door slowly closing behind her, one hinge at a time. When Daniel returned that evening, he looked even more tired. He kissed her shoulder and sat down at the table with a glass of water. "Thanks for everything," he murmured. Uncle really appreciated it. Lauren looked at him across the table. The setting sun poured golden light across the hardwood floor. Her voice was gentle, almost too gentle. Did he say anything else? Daniel blinked, then shook his head. Just thanks, and that he loved the peach cobbler. She nodded, watching him. He didn't meet her eyes. Later that night, when they were in bed, Lauren lay awake long after Daniel began to snore. The house was silent, except for the rhythmic creak of the radiator. Her hands rested on her stomach, and her mind drifted, not toward suspicion, not yet, but toward unease. Something inside her shifted, and she didn't know what it meant. She turned onto her side and stared at Daniel sleeping back. She remembered the way he had held her the night she told him about her ex-husband. The way he had kissed the top of her head and said, "You'll never go through something like that again." She wanted to believe him. She still did. But belief, she was beginning to realize, was not the same as certainty. And certainty was starting to slip through her fingers. Lauren woke to the sound of rain tapping gently against the window, the soft rhythm barely audible over the hum of the heater. The sun was still low, casting a grayish light across the bedroom. She lay there for a moment, nestled beneath the quilt Daniel's mother had made them the year they moved in together. For the first time in months, the school where she worked had canceled classes. Some sort of last-minute facilities inspection had closed the building, and the unexpected day off stretched before her like a blank canvas. The night before had been uneventful. Daniel came home later than usual, claiming traffic had been worse than expected. He'd looked exhausted, but he was gentle as always. He kissed her good night and slid beneath the covers, falling asleep in minutes. Lauren had watched him in the dim light, wondering, as she had more and more lately, what he wasn't telling her. She pushed the thought aside as she got out of bed. It was still early, and she had no intention of wasting the day. She slipped into a worn sweatshirt and leggings, made herself a cup of coffee, and padded into the kitchen. The familiar comfort of the room grounded her. The morning routine soothed her thoughts, steadied her nerves. It was then, standing by the stove with a mug warm in her hands, that the idea came to her. Not impulsive, not fueled by anger, just a simple, quiet decision. Today, she would drive to Daniel's uncle's house herself. She would deliver the food, say hello, and finally meet the man she had been cooking for all this time. It felt like the right thing to do. After all, Daniel had said many times how much his uncle appreciated the meals. Why wouldn't he be glad to meet the woman behind them? Lauren told herself it was just kindness. She didn't admit, even to herself, that a deeper motive had stirred beneath the surface. The growing itch of doubt, the gnawing desire to see the truth with her own eyes. She moved through the kitchen with purpose, gathering ingredients from the fridge and pantry. The process was second nature by now. Collard greens with smoked turkey, baked chicken with rosemary and garlic, cornbread muffins, and a small peach cobbler she had prepared the night before. She packed it all carefully, wrapping each dish in insulated cloth and placing them into the large food carrier she used for her catering side jobs. The drive, she remembered Daniel saying, took just under an hour. He never gave a full address, just a neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, and vague directions she had never needed to follow before. But Lauren remembered landmarks he'd mentioned: the faded red gas station, the old tire shop, the diner with the sign that flickered open in blue neon even in daylight. She dressed for comfort: jeans, a thick cardigan, her warmest boots, and pulled her hair back into a loose bun. As she loaded the food into the car, she paused for a moment, her hand resting on the trunk. A small chill passed through her, though the air was still. The sky was a dull silver, heavy with clouds. She looked up, then glanced toward the house. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. So why did she feel like something was about to shift? The drive was peaceful, the roads wet from the morning drizzle but clear. Lauren turned on the radio and let the soft tones of classic soul fill the car. She passed through familiar suburbs, then quieter streets lined with older homes and faded signage. As she got closer to the area Daniel had described, she slowed down, watching for the turnoff he'd mentioned. A narrow lane marked only by a leaning mailbox and a rusted stop sign. The neighborhood was modest. Small houses with weather-worn siding, porches crowded with potted plants and plastic chairs, American flags hanging from wooden posts. Children's bikes rested in driveways, and barking dogs announced her arrival as she rolled slowly past. She spotted the house almost immediately. It matched Daniel's vague descriptions: a pale blue single-story with white trim and a wide front yard bordered by hedges. There was a wooden porch with peeling paint, a swing hanging from the frame. A late-model sedan was parked in the driveway. Lauren pulled up to the curb and turned off the engine. Her heart began to race, though she told herself it was just nerves. She reached for the handle of the food carrier, adjusted her scarf, and stepped out into the cool air. But then she stopped. There was movement on the porch. 3 figures: a man, a woman, and a child. The man was Daniel. He stood with his back partially turned, speaking softly to the woman beside him. She was white, young, maybe early 30s, with light brown hair pulled into a ponytail and a soft expression on her face. In her arms, a little girl squirmed, reaching down with chubby fingers toward Daniel's hand. The child couldn't have been more than 5. When Daniel leaned down and the girl wrapped her arms around his neck, Lauren's stomach dropped. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw everything. The way Daniel smiled, the way the woman laughed at something he said, the way the little girl called him Daddy and clung to him like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Lauren stood frozen on the sidewalk, the carrier in her hands suddenly too heavy to hold. Her feet were glued to the ground, her breath caught in her throat. It was a tableau of domestic bliss, an image that shattered her world without making a sound. Daniel's voice had always been calm, steady, warm. It was the voice that had brought her back to herself after years of pain. That voice had whispered promises in the dark and told her she was enough. Now that same voice was speaking to another woman's child, wrapped in another woman's arms. The food carrier slipped from Lauren's grasp and hit the pavement with a dull thud. No one on the porch heard it. Her hands trembled as she bent to pick it up, but her legs moved on instinct. She turned back toward her car, her face flushed and her chest tight, as if the air had thickened around her. She didn't look back. The drive home blurred into a fog of noise and motion. Lauren couldn't remember turning on the ignition or merging onto the freeway. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, and her mind replayed the scene again and again. The child's laugh, the woman's smile, the way Daniel held them as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her vision blurred with tears. The windshield wipers moved in slow rhythm, barely able to keep up with the mist gathering in her eyes. Her heart beat wildly, disoriented by grief and disbelief. By the time she reached home, the sky had darkened. She didn't remember parking or opening the door. She walked into the kitchen, set the food carrier down on the counter, and stood still for a long time. The silence of the house surrounded her, thick and oppressive. She moved like a ghost through the familiar rooms, each one suddenly strange. The living room where they watched movies, the hallway where he once hung her artwork, the kitchen that smelled of warm spices and memories. All of it felt like a stage set built for a lie. When Daniel came home that evening, Lauren was already upstairs. She heard the front door open, heard the rustling of his coat, the familiar sound of his keys hitting the bowl by the entryway. She didn't go down to greet him. He called her name once, maybe twice. When she didn't answer, he went to the kitchen. She listened as he moved around, likely noticing the food she had packed untouched. She imagined the confusion on his face, the momentary pause, the shrug as he assumed she'd simply forgotten to put it away. But Lauren sat in the dark of their bedroom, staring at the wall, her hands clenched in her lap. She had wanted to surprise him. She had wanted to meet the man she had been feeding for years. Instead, she had discovered another life. One she had never been told about. One that now cast a long, dark shadow over everything she thought she knew. And yet, beneath the shock and sorrow, a question formed. Not just, who is she, or whose child is that, but something deeper. A quiet, devastating question that would haunt her long into the night. Why did he never think I deserved the truth? The house felt colder than usual. Not from the weather outside, though the November air had taken on a sharper edge, but from something within. The warmth that had once filled every room, the invisible thread of comfort and belonging that Lauren had woven over the years, now seemed frayed, brittle, and unraveling fast. The kind of cold that no heater could dispel settled deep into her chest, curling between her ribs and wrapping around her spine. She had driven home in a daze, the world outside her windshield no more tangible than a dream. Traffic lights, passing buildings, the dull hum of tires on wet asphalt. They all blurred together, as if her body had made the journey while her mind remained on that porch, watching the man she loved cradle a child she'd never seen, speak gently to a woman she had never known existed. Lauren couldn't remember turning the key in the door or walking up the stairs, only the numb, floating sensation that followed her into their bedroom like a shadow. She sat on the edge of the bed, her coat still on, scarf clutched in her hands, staring blankly at the framed photograph on the dresser, one of their favorites, taken on a trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains. In the picture, she and Daniel stood on a hilltop, winding their hair, arms wrapped around each other, faces lit with laughter. That day had felt like a promise, like something unshakable. Now it mocked her from its wooden frame. Downstairs, she could hear Daniel moving. The refrigerator door opened and closed. Footsteps crossed the kitchen floor. Silence, then the sound of him climbing the stairs, each step echoing louder than the last. She remained motionless, eyes fixed on the photo. When the bedroom door creaked open, she didn't look up. "Hey," he said softly, as though sensing something was off, but unsure what it was. "I saw the food on the counter. You okay?" She nodded automatically, not trusting her voice. The lie lodged in her throat like a shard of glass. Daniel walked over, kissed the top of her head, then sat beside her. He rubbed her back in slow circles, the same way he did when she was anxious or tired. It used to soothe her. Now it made her skin crawl, not from disgust but from the unbearable weight of what she knew and he didn't know she knew. She wanted to ask him outright, "Who is she? Who is the child? What kind of man are you?" But the words remained locked inside, heavy and sharp. Her chest ached with the effort to contain them. That night, she lay in bed beside him, stiff as stone. Daniel drifted off quickly, his breathing deep and even. Lauren stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her thoughts ran in circles, looping endlessly through what she had seen, what it meant, what she had believed. She remembered the little girl's voice calling him Daddy, the way she'd thrown her arms around his legs and looked up at him with complete trust. That wasn't a fleeting moment. That was familiarity, history, love. It hadn't been an accident that Lauren had seen them like that. It had been the unveiling of a truth she hadn't been invited to witness. At some point, the silence became unbearable. Lauren slipped out of bed, padded barefoot to the hallway, and sat on the stairs. She curled into herself, pressing her hands to her temples. Tears came then, slow and heavy, sliding down her cheeks without sobs. She didn't want to wake him. She didn't want his comfort. She wanted clarity, answers. She wanted her reality to make sense again. The next morning passed in slow motion. Daniel left early for a meeting, leaving a kiss on her forehead and a note on the counter that read, "Call me later. I'll bring dinner." Lauren stared at the note as if it were written in a language she no longer understood. The house was too quiet. She wandered from room to room like a ghost, touching things she'd arranged, furniture she'd picked out, shelves she'd dusted week after week. It was her home. Their home. And yet, she felt like a stranger in it now, as though the foundation had shifted beneath her feet while she wasn't looking. In the kitchen, she opened the fridge and saw the food she had prepared the day before, still untouched, still packed with care. The sight broke something in her. She slammed the door shut and leaned against it, her breath coming in ragged bursts. All her effort, her love, her belief in their shared life, it had all gone somewhere else. To someone else. Later, she tried to distract herself with small tasks. She folded laundry, reorganized the linen closet, cleaned out the spice drawer. But her thoughts kept returning to the woman on the porch, young, relaxed, unafraid. What did she know about Daniel? Did she know about Lauren? Was she part of some cruel arrangement, or just another in the web of lies he had spun? And the child. That little girl with wild curls and innocent eyes. Lauren couldn't stop seeing her face. The way she looked up at Daniel, the way she smiled. She wasn't some mistake, some accident. She was a presence in his life, a living, breathing connection to a truth Lauren had been denied. That night, Lauren didn't speak much during dinner. Daniel noticed, of course. He asked if everything was okay, if something had happened at work, if she was feeling sick. She offered non-committal answers, told him she was tired. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand, concern etched into his face. It was almost too much to bear. She wanted to scream, to throw her glass against the wall and demand the truth. But she didn't. Not yet. Some part of her wasn't ready, not to hear what he would say, not to see his face change from confusion to guilt, not to watch their life collapse under the weight of what she already knew. Instead, she nodded and forced a smile. She went through the motions of normalcy like an actor trapped in a role she no longer believed in. In the days that followed, Lauren became quieter, more distant. She avoided eye contact, skipped their nightly rituals, withdrew into herself. Daniel noticed but didn't push. He brought her tea in the mornings, offered to do the grocery shopping, kissed her hand when they passed in the hallway. His gentleness only made it worse, because it meant that whatever else he was hiding, he still cared. Maybe even still loved her. And that complicated everything. On Wednesday night, she found herself standing in the bathroom, staring at her reflection. Her eyes were tired, her face drawn. She looked older than she remembered, not from time, but from betrayal. She thought about confronting him, about demanding an explanation, but the thought filled her with dread. What if the truth was even worse than what she'd seen? What if the lie was the only thing holding their life together? She sat on the edge of the tub and closed her eyes. She needed to know, but she couldn't ask him. Not yet. If she was going to survive this, if she was going to make any decision at all, she had to see it for herself. She had to go back, not as a wife, as a stranger, someone who could ask questions without breaking. That night, as she lay beside Daniel in bed, staring once again at the ceiling, a plan began to form. Quiet, deliberate, necessary. She would return to that house. She would speak to the woman. She would find out who that little girl was. And most importantly, she would find out who Daniel had become. 3 days passed before Lauren felt ready to act. Each morning, she awoke earlier than usual, drifting through the house like someone living underwater, hearing muffled sounds and feeling movements as if from a distance. Daniel seemed to sense something in her, but he didn't question it outright. He offered kind gestures in silence. A folded blanket placed on the couch, a fresh pot of tea in the mornings, quiet glances he likely thought went unnoticed. But Lauren noticed. She noticed everything now, every shift in his expression, every pause between his words, every time he avoided looking at her directly when she asked, "How was your day?" The nights were the worst. Lying beside him, wrapped in the warmth of his body yet chilled by the memory of what she'd seen, Lauren felt like she was sharing a bed with two men, the Daniel she loved and the Daniel who stood on that porch with a woman and child. Which one was real? Which one had built this life with her? The question repeated endlessly, wearing a groove in her heart. On Friday, while Daniel was at work, Lauren sat down at the kitchen table with her notebook. She opened it to a clean page and stared at the blank lines. She didn't write anything for several minutes. Then, slowly, she began sketching out a loose plan, not in bold strokes or with a clear destination in mind, but with small steps. She didn't need to confront anyone. Not yet. She didn't need to accuse or demand or cry. All she needed was to understand. She had spent so long being told who Daniel was, by him, by others, by the way he treated her, that she had stopped questioning what she didn't see. That morning, she took out her laptop and searched the county property records, using the rough address Daniel had once mentioned when describing his uncle's house. It didn't take long. The house was registered under a woman's name, Ashley Morgan. No uncle listed, no signs of co-ownership, no medical care permits or home assistance certifications. Lauren felt her chest tighten, but she kept going. She searched social media. Ashley had no public accounts, but an old news article popped up, a local community report about a neighborhood art fair, mentioning Ashley Morgan as a volunteer and foster care advocate. No mention of Daniel. No mention of a husband. But a photograph accompanied the piece. Lauren recognized her immediately. The woman from the porch. She closed the laptop and sat back in her chair. Her mind swam with possibilities. Was Ashley his ex? A secret girlfriend? The child, Lily, if she remembered correctly, was she his daughter? If so, what did that make Lauren? An intermission? A distraction? That afternoon, she packed a simple tote bag with a notebook, her wallet, and a scarf to guard against the November chill. She didn't want to look formal or threatening, just someone passing through. She wore jeans, a soft cream sweater, and flat shoes. She pulled her hair into a loose bun and added earrings that gave her a look of quiet elegance, the kind that might disarm someone meeting a stranger at the door. The drive to the neighborhood felt longer than before, not because of traffic, but because of the weight of intention. Last time, she'd come on a whim with food in her hands and hope in her chest. This time, she came with silence as her companion, and a story prepared in case she needed it. She parked on the opposite side of the street, heart hammering in her chest. She sat there for a long time, staring at the house. It looked the same, modest, clean, quiet. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a small tricycle leaned against the porch railing. A string of colored lights hung across the windows, though they weren't lit. It was a home, not a hiding place, not a secret lair, a real, lived-in home. Eventually, she stepped out of the car and walked up the path. Each step felt rehearsed and yet impossible. At the gate, she paused, took a breath, and knocked softly on the door frame. A moment passed, then another, then the door opened. Ashley stood in the doorway wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. Her face showed surprise, but not fear. "Hi," Lauren said, her voice steady, casual. "Sorry to bother you. I'm working on a project about older neighborhood homes, architecture, community growth, that sort of thing. Your place caught my eye." Ashley blinked, tilting her head slightly. "A project?" Lauren smiled, a practice smile, soft and apologetic. "Kind of a personal blog. I'm trying to capture stories about houses with character. You've got a lovely porch." Ashley hesitated, then glanced behind her into the house. After a moment, she opened the screen door wider. "Well, sure, I guess. Come in." Lauren stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The interior was simple but clean, with a lived-in warmth. A faint scent of cinnamon and something floral hung in the air. In the corner, the little girl, Lily, sat on the floor playing with a toy car, her curls wild and her brow furrowed in concentration. Ashley led Lauren to the small kitchen table and offered her a chair. "Would you like some tea?" "That'd be nice, thank you." As Ashley moved about the kitchen, boiling water and pulling down mugs, Lauren took in the details. Photographs on the wall, crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, a pair of rain boots by the back door. Nothing flashy, nothing out of place, but everything real. "That's my daughter, Lily," Ashley said, nodding toward the child. "She's 5. Lauren nodded, her throat tight. "She's beautiful." Ashley smiled briefly, but didn't reply. The silence stretched. Finally, Lauren broke it. "I think I've seen you before," she said gently. Ashley turned, one hand still on the kettle. "I was here a few days ago," Lauren continued. "I didn't knock. I saw someone I know. I didn't expect to." Ashley watched her carefully, eyes narrowing with understanding. "You're Lauren." The name landed like a stone between them. Lauren didn't deny it. Ashley sighed and pulled out a chair, sitting down across from her. "I was wondering when you'd come back." Lauren's fingers curled around the mug Ashley set in front of her. "So, you knew about me?" "I did," Ashley said. "Daniel told me. Not everything, but enough." Lauren swallowed. "Then maybe you can tell me what he didn't." Ashley looked down at her hands, then back up. "It's not what you think, I promise." "Then what is it?" Ashley took a long breath. "Daniel and I aren't together. We never were, not really. I was with his brother, years ago. A long, messy relationship, drugs, chaos. He's gone now. Died in an accident. Lily is his daughter. Daniel is all we have." The words landed softly, but their impact echoed. Lauren stared at her. "He helps us," Ashley said. "He doesn't live here. He doesn't sleep here. He just shows up, pays for her school, buys groceries, reads to her when she can't sleep." "Why didn't he tell me?" Lauren asked, more to herself than to Ashley. "Because he's scared of losing you, of having to explain something that sounds complicated. But he's never lied about how he feels about you." Lauren sat still, absorbing it all. The weight of misunderstanding, the flood of relief mingled with residual anger. "I didn't mean to be a secret," Ashley said, her voice softer. "I'm not trying to be in the middle of anything. I just needed help. And he gave it. He's a good man." Lauren nodded slowly. Her heart ached in new ways now, less sharp, more lingering. She looked toward Lily, who now peeked up at her with cautious eyes. "Hi," the girl said shyly. "Hi there," Lauren answered, managing a small smile. They sat for a while longer, speaking in low tones, not arguing, not unraveling, just two women caught in the same story from opposite pages. When Lauren finally rose to leave, Ashley walked her to the door. "If you ever want to talk again," Ashley said, "you're welcome here." Lauren stepped outside and nodded. "Thank you for telling me the truth." As she walked back to her car, the wind picked up, scattering leaves across the pavement. The world felt changed. Not shattered, not healed, but changed. Back in the driver's seat, Lauren rested her hands on the wheel and stared at the house one last time. Not with jealousy, not with judgment, just understanding. Then she started the engine, turned toward home, and began the long, slow process of figuring out what to do next. The wind had picked up by the time Lauren pulled into her driveway, carrying with it the sharp, earthy scent of late autumn. The sun was dipping behind the rooftops, painting the sky in muted strokes of orange and gray. She sat in the car with the engine running, hands still on the wheel, eyes locked on the familiar outline of her own house. For a long time, she didn't move. The conversation with Ashley played on a loop in her mind, each word unspooling more slowly than the last. So much of what she had feared turned out not to be true, but that didn't erase the ache. Knowing that Daniel hadn't been unfaithful in the way she'd imagined didn't make her feel whole again. It didn't bring back the trust that had cracked when she saw him with that little girl in his arms. If anything, it left her tangled in something more complex. He hadn't lied to her out of malice. He hadn't betrayed her in the arms of another woman. But he had withheld the truth. He had kept a part of his life separate from her, cordoned off like a room she wasn't allowed to enter. And now that she had stepped inside, everything looked different. Even the man she thought she knew. When she finally turned off the ignition and stepped out of the car, the quiet of the neighborhood pressed in around her. Leaves rustled across the pavement. Somewhere a dog barked. The porch light flickered on as she approached, casting a soft glow on the front door. She unlocked it, stepped inside, and was met with the comforting, familiar scent of vanilla and lemonwood polish. The house was as she'd left it, neat, calm, hers. But the peace she once felt here had been replaced by a tension she couldn't shake. Daniel wasn't home yet. She was grateful for that. She went upstairs and changed into a sweater and loose cotton pants, then returned to the kitchen and put on a pot of tea. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She poured a cup and carried it to the dining table, sitting down in the same spot where she had so often watched him laugh, argue about movie plots, or tease her about her obsession with cinnamon. Tonight, the seat across from her was empty, but it felt full of questions, full of the weight of what still needed to be said. The front door opened just after 7. She heard the familiar jingle of keys in the bowl, the soft creak of his shoes on the floorboards. A moment later, Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, briefcase in hand, his face tired but warm. "Hey," he said, setting his bag down. "Smells good in here. You eat yet?" She shook her head. "No, I was waiting." He smiled and walked over to kiss her, but she tilted her face away slightly. It wasn't a rejection, not exactly, just a pause, a signal. He picked up on it immediately. He stepped back, studying her face. "Everything okay?" Lauren looked at him, really looked. The man standing in front of her had held her through her darkest nights, encouraged her through self-doubt, made her laugh when she wanted to cry. He wasn't a stranger, and yet part of him had been hidden from her all this time. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Okay." He sat across from her, hands folded on the table. His eyes searched hers, waiting. She didn't begin right away. She took a sip of her tea, placed the cup down carefully, and drew in a long breath. "I went to the house," she said. He blinked. "What house?" "The one you go to every week." Silence settled between them. His shoulders tensed. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "I saw you," she continued, "with the woman and the little girl. I didn't know what I was seeing at first. I don't know what I thought. I was confused, hurt. I left before you noticed me." Daniel's face went pale and he looked down at his hands. "Lauren." "I went back," she said, cutting him off gently. "I talked to her, Ashley. She told me everything." He looked up sharply, eyes wide. "She told you?" "She told me about your brother, about Lily, about how you helped them, about why you never said anything to me." Daniel exhaled, his posture slumping slightly. "I didn't want to lie. I just didn't know how to tell you. I thought if I explained it wrong, you'd think I'd betrayed you. And if I waited too long, it'd feel like a lie anyway." "It already does," Lauren said. "You say you didn't want to lie, but that's exactly what you did." He didn't argue. His eyes were heavy with regret. "She said there's nothing between you two, that she's not part of your life the way I thought she was." "She's not," he said quickly. "I swear to you, Lauren, there's nothing romantic there. It never was. She and my brother, they were a mess. After he died, she had no one. Lily was just a baby. I couldn't walk away. I couldn't leave them like that." Lauren nodded. She believed him. That wasn't the problem. "I don't blame you for helping them," she said. "I admire it, actually. But you didn't give me a chance to admire it. You decided for me. You decided what I could handle, what I needed to know, how I'd react. That's not love, Daniel. That's control." He flinched. "I wasn't trying to control you." "But you were," she said, voice firmer now. "You thought keeping this part of your life separate would protect me. Or maybe protect yourself. But what it really did was break something. Something I don't know if I can fix." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Tell me how to fix it. Please." She shook her head slowly. "I don't have that answer right now. I need time. I need space to figure out what this means for us." He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "I understand." They sat in silence again, not out of anger, but because there was nothing more to say. Not yet. The truth had been laid bare between them, and it would take time to understand what to do with it. That night, they slept in the same bed, but didn't touch. Daniel stayed on his side, barely moving. Lauren stared at the ceiling, just as she had for the past week, but this time her mind wasn't looping in confusion. Now she was building something new out of what remained. Not reconciliation, not yet, but clarity. The next morning, Daniel left early. He didn't ask questions. He kissed her forehead before leaving, and she let him. After he was gone, Lauren made herself breakfast, sat by the window, and thought about what came next. She knew she couldn't go back to pretending. That version of their life was gone. But she also knew that Daniel wasn't the villain her pain had painted him to be. He was a man who had tried to do the right thing, and in doing so, had done the wrong thing by her. Forgiveness wasn't immediate. Trust wasn't a light switch. But somewhere in the quiet of that morning, Lauren felt something settle inside her. Not peace, but a beginning. A sense that she could stand in the truth now, even if it hurt. She didn't know where their relationship would go, but for the first time in days, she knew where she stood. And that was a place she had built for herself. The house seemed quieter after Daniel left that morning, though nothing had physically changed. The same ticking of the clock in the hallway, the same low hum of the refrigerator, the same creak in the floorboard near the kitchen. And yet, something had shifted, and Lauren felt it in every step she took. It wasn't just the absence of sound, but the absence of certainty, the comfort of routine replaced by the weight of a decision not yet made. She stood by the window in the kitchen, her mug of coffee cooling in her hands. Outside, the neighborhood moved on as usual. A man jogged past with a golden retriever. Bundled children ran toward a waiting school bus, and somewhere down the block, someone was already mowing their lawn despite the chill in the air. Lauren watched them all as if through glass, detached and still. The conversation from the night before still echoed in her chest. She hadn't yelled, neither had Daniel. No tears, no accusations, no slamming of doors, just truth. The truth, in its plainest form, could be more devastating than any fight. It left no room for denial, no space to retreat. It had sat between them at the kitchen table like a guest no one invited, but no one dared ask to leave. Lauren turned away from the window and wandered through the house. Her fingers brushed the edge of the bookshelf in the living room, trailed along the back of the couch, rested briefly on the frame of a photograph. She passed the office where she used to sit and work on recipes for her side catering business. She stopped in front of the hallway mirror and stared at herself, not the hurried glance she gave her reflection each morning, but a long, searching look. She looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying something too heavy for too long. There were faint lines around her eyes that hadn't been there last year, and her expression had hardened into something thoughtful but guarded, the kind of face that had learned to endure before it learned to trust. She returned to the bedroom and packed a small overnight bag, just enough for a few days. A few changes of clothes, her notebook, a paperback novel she'd been meaning to read for months. She didn't write a note for Daniel. She didn't need to. He would understand. He already did. Before she left, she paused at the kitchen table and glanced down at the empty placemat across from hers. Then she opened the door and stepped out into the cold air, locking the door behind her with steady hands. She didn't go to a hotel or a friend's house. Instead, she drove out of the city, past the suburbs, and into the countryside where her late aunt's cottage still stood, a modest little place nestled between old pines and gently sloping hills. It had sat empty since the funeral, but Lauren had kept the keys and paid the property taxes every year. Something about it felt too sacred to sell. The drive took nearly 2 hours. Along the way, she turned the radio off and let the silence stretch. She didn't need noise right now, she needed stillness. As she passed familiar landmarks, a gas station with a sun-faded sign, a winding creek beneath a rusted bridge, she felt layers of tension begin to peel away. When she pulled into the driveway, the gravel crunched beneath her tires. The cottage looked the same as she remembered, white paint peeling around the edges, the porch sagging slightly, wind chimes clinking gently in the breeze. The key turned easily in the lock, and as she stepped inside, the scent of dust and pine greeted her. She spent the first few hours airing out the rooms, opening the windows, sweeping away cobwebs. There was no television, no Wi-Fi, no distractions, just the sound of wind in the trees and the occasional rustle of squirrels in the attic. In the evening, she lit a fire in the small hearth and sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She didn't cry. The tears had already come and gone in private moments back home. Here, there was only space. Space to think, to feel, to remember. She thought of Daniel, his face when she told him she knew, the weight in his eyes, the silence he didn't try to escape. He hadn't begged. He hadn't defended himself with elaborate justifications. He had listened, and for that, she had felt something shift. She also thought of Ashley. How calm she had been, how unthreatening, how she had told Lauren, with sincerity and without apology, that Daniel was just doing what he thought was right. That there was no romance, no betrayal, only a child left behind, and a man trying not to fail her. Could Lauren be angry at that? Could she really fault him for stepping up where others would have walked away? And yet, it wasn't the presence of Lily that hurt the most. It was the secrecy. The fact that Lauren had poured herself into their life together, into every Sunday meal, every gesture of support, believing she knew the full picture. But part of Daniel had always been elsewhere, and she hadn't been given the choice to understand it. She had been loving half a man without knowing. Over the next 2 days, Lauren walked through the woods, picked dried herbs from the garden her aunt once tended, and cooked small, simple meals for herself. She sat on the porch in the mornings with a cup of tea and listened to birdsong, and in the evenings she read by the fire, letting herself be pulled into someone else's story. She didn't rush her thoughts. She let them rise and fall like waves, memories of her childhood, her first marriage, the long road she'd walked to find stability, the feeling of walking into Daniel's arms for the first time, how safe he had felt, how safe he still felt despite everything. By the third night, as the firelight flickered across the walls, Lauren found herself journaling, not for clarity, but for honesty. She wrote down what she feared, losing her independence again, trusting too easily, loving someone more than they loved her. She wrote about what she admired in Daniel, his quiet strength, his willingness to give without expecting praise. She wrote about Lily and how the child's eyes had reminded her of something pure, unbroken. It was that thought that finally brought tears again. She cried, not from pain this time, but from the sheer weight of everything she'd carried alone. Grief, confusion, betrayal, love, all braided together so tightly she hadn't known where one feeling ended and the next began. The next morning, Lauren stood in the small kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of steaming coffee, and looked out the window at the first signs of frost. The garden was quiet, bare. The trees beyond it were nearly stripped of their leaves. Winter was coming, and with it, a kind of stillness she hadn't known she needed. She thought about going back, about what it would mean. Not as a surrender, not as an act of forgiveness, but as a choice. A decision made in full knowledge, not in blindness. Could she live with what had happened? Could she rebuild trust with someone who had fractured it, not out of cruelty, but out of fear? Could she share Daniel's burden instead of being shut out by it? By mid-morning, she had her answer. She packed her things slowly, folding each item with care. She cleaned the cottage, turned off the heat, and locked the door behind her. On the drive back, she didn't feel dread. She didn't feel certainty either, but she felt ready. And that was enough. As the city skyline came into view, Lauren thought about what she would say when she walked through the door. She wouldn't pretend nothing had happened. She wouldn't forget the silence she had endured. But she would no longer live in it. She would ask for honesty, for effort, for something new. She would ask to be part of the whole story, not just the parts that were easy to share. And, for the first time since everything broke open, she believed that maybe, just maybe, Daniel would meet her there. Lauren returned home just after 10 in the morning. The city hadn't changed in the days she'd been gone, but something inside her had. The streets looked familiar, yes, but they no longer carried the same weight they had when she left. As she turned onto her block, she realized how strange it was that nothing ever stood still when your heart did. The same cars were parked outside the same houses, the same wind rattled the same empty trash bins along the curb, and the same dog barked from behind the neighbor's fence. But she was no longer the same woman who had driven away only a few days earlier with a heart full of uncertainty and a mind full of questions. She parked the car in front of the house and sat behind the wheel for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes on the front door. She could already feel the silence waiting inside, not the heavy silence of betrayal or distance this time, but something softer, tentative, hopeful. She didn't know exactly what she would say to Daniel. She only knew that she had to say something. And, more importantly, she had to mean it. When she stepped inside, the house welcomed her with the faint scent of the cinnamon candle she had left burning often before all this began. Daniel wasn't there, which she had half expected. The space was tidy. There was a note on the counter in his handwriting. No pleading, no guilt. Just a line that read, "I'll be home after lunch. I'll wait for you if you want to talk." She set down her bag, hung her coat, and stood in the quiet for a long while, looking around the living room. Everything was still in its place. The throw blanket folded neatly over the back of the couch. The framed photo from their Asheville trip on the side table. Her favorite cookbook still open to a flagged recipe on the kitchen counter. All the details of a life that had been real. That still could be. She spent the next hour moving through the house slowly, reacquainting herself with its spaces, not just physically, but emotionally. She ran her fingers along the worn edge of the dining table where they had spent countless meals. She lingered in the hallway outside their bedroom door, remembering mornings when he'd surprise her with coffee and kisses. She sat briefly at the foot of the bed, closed her eyes and tried to feel the warmth that once wrapped around her like a blanket. And then she went to the kitchen. Without thinking too hard about it, Lauren reached for a mixing bowl and began to bake. Not for obligation, not to fill time, but to anchor herself. Her hands moved instinctively. Flour, butter, sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg. She made her grandmother's apple spice bread, the one Daniel always said reminded him of fall and family. The scent filled the kitchen, curling into the hallways, softening the sharp edges of what had lingered for too long. It was nearly noon when she heard the key turn in the lock. Daniel stepped inside cautiously, as if afraid he might disrupt something fragile. When he saw her, standing at the counter with flour on her hands and the oven humming behind her, he froze. "Hi," she said softly. His shoulders dropped, as if he'd been holding his breath all morning. "Hi." She nodded toward the table. "You want some tea?" He looked at her like he wasn't sure whether to speak or just sit down and cry. "Yeah," he said. "I'd love that." They moved around each other in the kitchen, their rhythm slow but familiar. She poured the tea. He set the cups down. When they sat at the table, there was a stretch of silence. Not awkward, not painful, just expectant. "I needed time," Lauren began. "Not to punish you, just to think." Daniel nodded. "I figured. I didn't want to push." "I know." She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "And I appreciate that." He looked at her across the table, the way he had done so many mornings, but now with something raw in his eyes. "I was scared," he said. "I kept thinking that if I told you everything, it would ruin what we had, that you'd see me differently, that I'd lose you." "You almost did," she replied gently. "Not because of Lily, not because of Ashley, but because you didn't trust me with the truth." He lowered his head, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "I know. and I hate that I made you feel like you were outside of something I never should have hidden. I don't need you to be perfect, Daniel, she said, but I do need you to be honest. I need to feel like I'm part of your whole life, not just the pieces you think I can handle. He looked up then, eyes bright with emotion. You are. You always were. I got it wrong. I thought protecting you meant shielding you. I forgot that strength doesn't come from what we keep hidden. It comes from what we're willing to face together. Lauren swallowed the lump in her throat. She reached across the table and took his hand. I want to move forward, but it has to be different now. No more silence. No more halves. He nodded slowly, fingers tightening gently around hers. I'll do whatever it takes. I mean that. She smiled faintly. Then let's start now. The next morning, they drove together to Ashley's house. Lauren had prepared a small basket with baked goods, apple bread, a few of Daniel's favorites, and a separate bag of cookies for Lily. It wasn't an act of charity or obligation. It was something deeper, an offering, a gesture of goodwill, of reconciliation, not just with Daniel, but with herself. As they pulled into the familiar driveway, Lauren felt the flutter of nerves rise in her chest. She glanced at Daniel, who looked just as tense, but his hand found hers where it rested on her lap, and they sat in that quiet, holding on to each other for a few more seconds. Ashley opened the door before they reached the porch. She looked surprised to see Lauren, but not uneasy. If anything, there was something relieved in her eyes. I knew you'd come, she said. Lauren nodded. I hope that's okay. Ashley stepped aside and opened the door wider. Of course. Come in. Inside, the house was warm and simple, just as Lauren remembered. The scent of baby shampoo and baked oatmeal lingered in the air. Toys were scattered in the living room. A small coat hung from a peg by the door. It was a space that had known both struggle and love, and Lauren could feel it in her bones. Lily came out of the hallway and stopped when she saw the guests. She looked from Daniel to Lauren, her eyes curious. Hi, Lauren said softly, kneeling down. I'm Lauren. I'm Daniel's wife. Lily tilted her head, thoughtful. You smell like cookies. Lauren laughed. That's because I brought you some. The child's face lit up. Ashley smiled faintly and shook her head. She'll never forget you now. They sat in the kitchen, drinking tea and talking. Not about the past, not about mistakes, but about small things. School, work, Lily's obsession with dinosaurs. Lauren listened and spoke and laughed, not because it was easy, but because it was real. She watched Daniel as he read a book to Lily on the floor later, his voice animated, the child giggling, the moment whole and honest, and she realized she no longer felt like an outsider. She had stepped into the full truth of the man she loved, and she hadn't turned away. Later, as they prepared to leave, Ashley walked them to the door. She turned to Lauren and said, "Thank you for this, for being kind." Lauren shook her head. Kindness wasn't the hard part. Getting here was. Ashley understood. They shared a look. Two women whose lives had crossed in an unexpected way, both reshaped by a man who tried to do right by everyone, even if imperfectly. As Lauren and Daniel walked hand in hand to the car, she felt something settle inside her. It wasn't closure. It wasn't finality. But it was peace. She didn't know exactly what the future would bring. But she knew this. She hadn't chosen ease. She had chosen truth. She had chosen love, not the naive kind that ignored flaws, but the steady kind that stood beside them. And now, she hadn't just found her way back to Daniel. She had made room in her heart for something more. Not just him, not just her, but all of them. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more. Check out the next video and don't forget to share this one with someone who needs to hear it.